Hello and welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Han Da-eun in Seoul. The semiconductor industry is often seen as the backbone of modern technology. For South Korea, it's the backbone of the nation's export-driven economy. And the country's leading chip makers are now standing at a critical juncture faced with heated global competition for advanced chips for the next generation of artificial intelligence platforms. While SK Hynix is forecast to retain the crown as HBM leader this year with a global market share of over 50%, Samsung Electronics is not far behind with ambitious plans to mass produce advanced HBM memory chips from the third quarter. But challenges remain amid renewed fears over the AI bubble, geopolitical tensions, and U.S. election uncertainties. On this episode of Within the Frame, we look into the latest issues surrounding the global AI chip race and look ahead to the challenges and opportunities South Korea faces in the global market. To help us navigate through the complexities, Yang Jun-seok, economics professor at the Catholic University of Korea, joins us. It's always great to see you, Professor Yang.
Happy to be here.
Also with us tonight is Kim Ha-gyun, professor of banking and finance at Texas A&M University's Mays Business School. Welcome, as always.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, Professor Yang, I want to start with you. South Korea logged the largest current account surplus in 7 years in June, driven, of course, by robust semiconductor exports. Could you first break down chip exports for the month of June and also give us your overall assessment of semiconductor recovery in the first half of this year?
Okay, well, the Bank of Korea balance of payment figures show that during the first half of the year, semiconductor exports recorded nearly $67 billion. That's up 50.4% by value from last year. Now, BOK's balance of payment data tracks the other data that we have for exports, the customs monthly data. Nice thing about the customs data is that they give more details on exports. And what the customs figures showed during the first half of the year is that the higher exports are due to, first, higher demand for semiconductors, and then higher prices for memory chips, and third, increased sales of higher value-added chips, such as the HBM, high bandwidth memory chips that you've mentioned for AIs, and also SSD memories for servers. The growth of exports has taken both in terms of value, volume, and price. But the growth numbers perhaps are even higher this year because last year's export numbers were so bad. 2023 exports compared to 2022 exports are down 35%. So a lot of the 50.4% growth number is recovery from that low we had last year. And that was partially because during the pandemic, the semiconductor users had hoarded chips, so we had to wait until that inventory ran out. And then it was helped this year by investment into AI, which has caught popular imagination, but it's not entirely clear if the increased demand from AI investment will be permanent. The AI sector is facing some pushback as technology growth has slowed a bit, but the consensus seems to be that the increased demand and exports for semiconductors will last at least until the first half of next year.
Samsung Electronics' second quarter profit jumped 15-fold to nearly $8 billion in soaring chip demand, while SK Hynix earnings during the same period also hit a record high on AI chip boom. So quite a strong recovery there. But as you floated the question, Professor Yang, questions remain on whether AI investment will be permanent, which leads us to our next question, Dr. Kim. Despite record profit, shares of Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix tumbled last week amid growing fears of an AI bubble. Now, investor concerns intensified that AI might not be the technological marvel it's cracked up to be, with Goldman Sachs issuing a warning last month. What renewed fears over an AI bubble burst, and what impact would it have on Korean companies going forward?
So there could be several factors at play here. So clearly, as you mentioned, and also, as Professor Yang mentioned, there's a worry that AI-related stocks may be been pushed to unsustainable levels due to hype rather than fundamental value. I mean, there's clearly uncertainty about AI's real-world impact and whether it will deliver the revolutionary changes and economic benefits that's been promised. Lastly, there are some concerns about also the sustainability of the surge in demand for these HBM memories and other the new chips. And along this line, the Samsung and the SKs, who are the major players, actually, the stock price has actually been pushed back because of like these worry. But I checked the stock price actually today, and it seems to be in recovery mode. So I don't know if this is really a big pushback because there was some down, but I think it's going up. And also other big tech companies in the US, such as NVIDIA and the Apple and other company stock prices are in recovery mode. So it is true that these things are still quite uncertain, and the industry's the true potential should unravel as this time goes by. But still, clearly, the most of these big companies actually are still increasing their investment for the AI-related businesses, and also the supply of this HBM chips are still in short supply. So I think for the time being, there will be ups and downs, but overall, the outlook of the market seems to be much brighter than I think the recent the hiccups of the stock market. And as I said, I think the market correction seemed to be, again, kind of done for the time being.
Over $12 billion are estimated to be injected into the AI sector every quarter, but investors are concerned that, as you pointed out, whether the future return on the massive investment will bear fruit. But also, as you pointed out, the AI industry is expected to continue its growth. Professor Yang, Samsung Electronics has announced it'll begin mass producing 5th generation 8-layer HBM3E products, the crown jewel of AI performance, in the third quarter. And there was a loud noise over whether the company had passed NVIDIA's certification. How do you view the impact of frequent rumors on Samsung, and what are your expectations for the company's HBM3E production?
Well, my personal expectation is that Samsung's new chip will pass the NVIDIA test, but even if it doesn't, Samsung will continue to do relatively well in the near future. And by near future, I mean the next year or so. The semiconductor market as a whole is still booming. It's still in the recovery stage from the low purchases that we had last year. And while Samsung may have fallen behind SK Hynix in terms of HBM chips, and perhaps even if, and I doubt that personally, but even if the new HBM chips by Samsung are judged inferior to the Hynix chips, there's still a lot of demand for HBM chips, even if they may not be fully as good as other options available. So Samsung will get sufficient number of customers to keep themselves in business, though they may be getting perhaps a bit lower price than had it passed NVIDIA's test. But also Samsung's still the largest memory chip maker. Samsung is still the second largest foundry in the world. So they will do well, at least for the short and medium term. What may be worrying, though, is that in the IT industry, the winner tends to take a large share of the market, usually be the majority of the market. And those leading firms tend to be technology leaders overall. They may fall behind in one or two small areas, but on average, they tend to be technology leaders, not only with hardware like semiconductors, but also services and software as well. And perhaps the concern is that they fell behind SK Hynix, perhaps because they were too complacent. That was the reasoning behind Samsung Electronics changing the management earlier this year. And if Samsung keeps on stumbling, then they may give up their leading position. I think that's the concern that's hidden behind all the discussion that is going on right now. It's happening to Intel, apparently. Their last two generations of chips had technical problems, including heat problems that can cause permanent damage to their chips. And because of that, they seem to be losing a lot of their momentum, falling behind NVIDIA. We obviously don't want that for Samsung, so they have time to change. Hopefully, they'll learn from this lesson and they'll keep on their toes.
Zooming in on SK Hynix, the company is set to receive up to $450 million in grants from the U.S. government, which is aimed at funding the company's advanced packaging plant and R&D facility for AI products in U.S. state of Indiana. Professor Kim, how do you evaluate the subsidy in relation to SK's investment there, and how much do you think it'll enhance SK's global competitiveness?
Well, as you mentioned earlier, I think SK has announced plans to invest significantly in the U.S. over the next, 5 to 10 years, and they received this, huge amount of grant, and this actually is about like 11 to 12% of the total planned investment, I believe, and its significance, of course, goes beyond actually the monetary value. The subsidy is specifically earmarked for this packaging plant and R&D facilities for AI in Indiana, but it obviously aligns well with the U.S. interest in bolstering domestic semiconductors capabilities and SK's global expansion strategy, I believe. And I think this probably will enhance SK's market presence and access in the U.S. I mean, it's a big company already, but clearly by establishing a stronger foothold in the U.S. market, SK Hynix positions should be closer to major U.S. tech companies. And also this type of proximity, I think, is important in an industry where the close collaboration is important. So the synergy actually is there. And also I think it works well as a diversification strategy because it reduces the SK's dependence on Asian manufacturing bases, especially probably China. And therefore it may mitigate some of the geopolitical risks. And also I think it's going to basically help the SK to just negotiate with the U.S. companies, etc. So overall, I think this is pretty good news. The existing risk probably is depending on the U.S. elections of the presidents. I think the subsidy plan may change, and also its timing actually may change as well. So that kind of things could be some grain of salt, and the investors as well as the company probably have to prepare for some of the risks.
Professor Yang, you've briefly touched upon this, but fierce competition is expected between SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics over next generation AI chips. While SK is currently showing a slight lead, how do you expect things to play out from here, and what will be the key to winning the tight race? You mentioned a bit about how Samsung's complacency could have been what led the company to trail behind SK, but if you could elaborate further.
Sure. Because Samsung hopefully has learned their lessons, they will hopefully keep on their toes. I think what's optimistic here is that SK Hynix has sort of joined the race. So far, this global semiconductor competition has been between TSMC and Samsung, who's going to be able to develop the next generation chips the fastest, even though they're competing on the area of foundries rather than memories. But now Hynix has shown that it can be a player in the technology race as well, because they pulled ahead, at least temporarily, from Samsung. Now, as I said, I expect Samsung to pass NVIDIA tests, and I expect the Samsung chips to compete on an equal level ground with Hynix chips, but I think Hynix has proven to be their player in this field, and Samsung will have to compete with Hynix. And one of the problems that we've seen in the not only in the semiconductor industry, but in the Korean exports in general, is that we may be falling behind on technology. Our whole export strategy depends on keeping ahead of China and try to catch up with Japan and United States as much as possible. But we seem to be falling behind in the last 3 or 4 years. But with Hynix becoming a player that's capable of competing against Samsung, Samsung and Hynix, hopefully by competing, will set the technology race back up again, and that will mean acceleration in Korea's technological output.
So Samsung Electronics is expected to pass NVIDIA's test. That piece of information may be the most important piece of information for investors tonight. Now, Professor Kim, the U.S., meanwhile, is reportedly mulling new restrictions on China's access to AI memory chips and other related equipment, an announcement of which is expected at the end of this month. What does this mean for South Korea's memory chip makers?
It means more regulatory challenges, of course. So the companies will face clearly increased regulatory pressure. So they need to carefully navigate U.S. export controls while trying to maintain the presence in the Chinese market, because that's also a big market to these two big companies. Second, I think market disruption is possible. So clearly, China is a crucial market for Korean memory chip makers. And this new restrictions could disrupt the existing supply chains and sales channels. So we may see some short-term turbulence or decrease in revenue if this actually is going to be a binding regulation, especially for the AI chip segment, I think. But as just, we talked about, like the China actually is a big, the buyer for these type of, the products. And now the NVIDIA developed a separate chip product line. So it's not as cutting edge as the AI chips that they are selling as a major products, but slightly less advanced chips for the Chinese markets to bypass the regulation. So that's always the case, right? So the regulation hits and then the companies try to find the loopholes and the bypasses to get around the difficulty. So this could increase the production cost and R&D cost and stuff like that, but it also may lead to some new opportunities, as well as also some unintended consequences as well. So for instance, like this restriction actually may benefit Korean firms, at least for the time being, because if somehow the China cannot really just develop all the new technologies for the time being, then maybe the Korean companies actually have some technological edges so that they can earn time until the China catches up. So that's benefit. But at the same time, because of the falsity and the short supply of these chips, China may just exert more effort to develop their own chips, and then I think they become even more lethal competitors in the future. So there are always the dynamic components here. So overall, I think this is a very complex situation. In the short term, it's more regulatory challenges, but in the future, it's more of a industry structure in terms of the number of competitors and things like that.
The U.S. presidential election is another big variable that could have a huge impact on South Korean firms. Dr. Yang, while we're yet to learn more about Democratic nominee Harris's trade policies, how would Trump's presidency under the overarching goal of MAGA, or Make America Great Again policy, affect Korea's semiconductor industry?
Well, problem is you can't really tell, because President Trump, when he was president, he wanted U.S. to have its own production facilities for semiconductors. He also wanted foreign investment to create jobs, but President Trump has said some worrying things, not necessarily about Samsung and Hynix. He said very few things about Samsung and Hynix during the campaign, but he did say something that was very worrying about TSMC and Taiwan. Trump said that TSMC does not deserve to get money from the United States, given all the money that U.S. paid for Taiwan's defense. Now, Korea is obviously in a similar situation. At least according to that statement, Trump, if he is elected, may go against further subsidies to Samsung and Hynix. But on the other hand, during his first term, when Samsung Hynix and LG established factories in the U.S. He said that he was very happy about them, and he wanted more foreign investment to create jobs in the United States. So we don't know which way he's going to jump in the next few months or the next year. But one optimistic thing that we should think about is that the subsidies are right now given by law, the IRA, and in order to overturn the IRA, you not only need the president to act as sort of an engine, but you also need both houses of Congress to be majority to be Republicans under Trump's command. Now, in the election, we will have to see whether that happens or not, but I think it's a very unlikely scenario that Trump will be elected president and both houses will be Republican controlled. I think at least one of the houses will be under control of the Democrats. And in that case, it'll be very hard to overturn the federal law, IRA, that gives these subsidies. And also, I think the state government subsidies will remain because obviously state governments will like having these jobs created by Korean factories in their state.
And very quickly before we let you go, Professor Kim, many economists say South Korea, despite being a global leader in memory chips, lags behind when it comes to advanced next-generation AI technology. What efforts must be made to stay ahead of the game in the global AI chip rush?
The situation echoes the early 2000 IT industry evolution to me. And at that time, I think the markets were really rapidly changing because of this new technological development. I think it's kind of similar. So to stay competitive and catch up, I think South Korea must pursue multifaceted strategy, but the most important thing at the end of the day, what matters is human capital, I think, who can develop this upcoming AI industries. What is interesting, of course, for the AI is the whole point of AI is whether we can replace or help the part or all of the human capital. So, but I don't think the complete replacement is possible, but it's actually can really boost the labor productivity if it's well implemented. So the talent development is going to be really critical for the time being. Yes, I think we are a bit lagging in terms of like this, the chip making part, but I think at the end of the day, the software matters and also the human capital matter. Therefore, the education and all this more foundational basic studies actually will be more and more important because unlike the other businesses, the AI is actually requiring the correct and rigorous knowledge input to be useful. So I think the more basic studies and the education focus and the investment in the universities and R&Ds will be very important for the time being.
And that's where we'll conclude our discussion today. Thank you, as always, Professor Kim, for your insights.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dr. Young, for your perspectives.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.